Hi, everybody. All right, it's recording now. I'm going to wait a little bit, about 30 more seconds or so, for anybody else to join. So we'll just wait a little bit longer. Thank you for being patient. All right, so it is 6:01. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you so much for joining us at the Tourette Association of America for Living with OCD, OCD as my superpower. This webinar is designed with young adults in mind. My name is Haley Carlton, and I'm the youth coordinator here at the Tourette Association of America. You will find resources in the chat section of this webinar, including our TAA Young Adult Guide. These resources are also available in hard copies by reaching out to support@tourette.org. I'd like to introduce our presenters for tonight's webinar, Dr. Shannon Bennett and Izzy Lieberman. Izzy Lieberman is a 17-year-old senior at Viewpoint School in Calabasas, California. When he isn't playing on the varsity football team, he can be found working at Paxton Clothing in the local mall or working on a student film with his classmates. Diagnosed with Tourette at age 5, Izzy struggled with tics and intrusive thoughts throughout elementary school and middle school. When his younger brother also was diagnosed with Tourette and was consequently bullied at school, Izzy decided to intervene. He became an official TAA youth ambassador in 2020 and has enjoyed educating teachers and students alike about what Tourette is and, more importantly, what Tourette is not. Dr. Shannon Bennett is a licensed clinical psychologist with expertise in cognitive behavioral interventions for child, adolescent, and adults suffering from OCD, anxiety disorders, tic disorders, or related conditions. Dr. Bennett is co-director of the Weill Cornell Pediatric OCD, Anxiety, and Tic Disorders Program, or POCAP, where she provides diagnostic assessments, cognitive behavioral therapy, and consultations. Dr. Bennett received her BA from the University of Notre Dame and her PhD from Boston University. We will take questions at the end of this presentation. Feel free to put any questions in the questions and answers section on your panel at any time during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will ask you to complete a survey. We are funded by the CDC to bring programs like this one to you. Please take the time to fill out the short survey at the end of this program, as your input is valuable for future programming. Thank you and enjoy the webinar. And with that, Dr. Bennett, you have the virtual floor.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to talk with you about OCD. I'll give a brief introduction, talking a little bit about how we understand OCD, OCD and Tourette, and then I will turn it over to Izzy to share with us more about his experiences. So I'm going to start with very basic things that probably many of you already know, but OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. And when we break that down, the O stands for obsessions, which are unwanted or intrusive, often repetitive thoughts. They can be images, urges, or impulses that often make us feel uncomfortable. They bring distress, discomfort, or anxiety when they kind of pop into the mind. The C stands for compulsions, which are typically repetitive behaviors or rituals that are usually performed because they relieve that distress or discomfort or anxiety that was brought on by the unwanted thoughts or intrusive urges. But it really, compulsions, it feels like we have to do them, or often have to do them in a particular way or a particular order. And often people experience this idea that something bad might happen if they didn't perform the compulsions in a particular way. And the D stands for disorder, which is essentially, it means that the obsessions and compulsions are causing a problem. Often that means they're taking up too much time, or they're getting in the way of other things that we want or need to be doing, like school or work or social life or relaxation. And unfortunately, they create a cycle, and we'll talk more about this cycle. But the more we give in to the obsessions and the compulsions, the more we perform compulsions in response to obsessions, it tends to make them worse, and they can spread and they can grow and kind of balloon in a way that creates more and more problems. So a few experiences and examples, and we would love to hear more from Izzy and you all about your own experiences and examples, but some common ones are intrusive thoughts about contamination or sickness, and related compulsions about washing hands or cleaning, to feel like you're getting rid of those germs or contamination. Maybe having to line things up in a particular way or a particular order, upsetting or uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, or urges. There's often this fear of not being able to complete the compulsions in a particular way, or feeling very upset if you get interrupted while doing a compulsion or a particular routine, or you're asked to stop to do something else. And then sometimes that makes one feel like they have to start over at the beginning. So the good news about OCD is that we do have well-researched, well-established both behavioral treatments as well as medication treatments. And our sort of gold standard behavioral treatment for OCD is called exposure and response prevention. So this becomes a little bit of an alphabet soup, right? So ERP, exposure and response prevention, is a type of cognitive behavioral therapy, which we call CBT. And it's the CBT intervention for OCD. So it's a lot of letters, but exposure and response prevention is a specific treatment for OCD. It's a behavior therapy. There's decades of research supporting its effectiveness in decreasing compulsions and decreasing the stress associated with obsessions. And what exposure means, exposure essentially means experiencing something that we would rather avoid. It's exposing ourselves to an uncomfortable emotion at the most basic level, and that emotion that may be brought on by a situation or an experience. And response prevention means stopping yourself from engaging in a compulsion or some other behavior or some other form of avoidance, right? So we stop ourselves from engaging in the compulsion or behavior that would allow us to avoid the distress from the unwanted thoughts, feelings, or triggers. Right. So exposure means we allow ourselves to feel uncomfortable, perhaps like from a feeling contaminated, without washing our hands or doing the thing that would relieve that distress. Okay, so this is very hard. Exposure therapy is hard because it requires that we feel uncomfortable. We do the thing or put ourselves in the situation that we would rather avoid. It often means we have to feel more anxiety. But we do that in the service of learning how to deal with that anxiety and deal with those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors more effectively in a way that will then make the anxiety less over time. Okay, so it's a little bit about what we experience in the short term, right? Feeling more uncomfortable in the short term to have more benefit in the long term. When we avoid our feelings or when we're engaging in compulsions, it may relieve our distress in the short term, but it often tends to make things harder in the long term. Okay, so exposure therapy is kind of getting comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, right? We know how to deal with uncomfortable feelings throughout the rest of our life. Now, I will just add that when we engage in a compulsion, often in the moment, it's the most sort of rational decision that we might make. Because when we are upset by an obsession, when we get triggered and we feel anxious or we feel fearful, that's your body's fight or flight system firing and telling you that something is really wrong. But the problem is it's a false alarm. It's like a fire drill or a car alarm that's going off when no one's breaking into the car. So when we experience fear or distress from OCD, it's what we call a false alarm. And when we perform a compulsion to relieve that distress, it's like we're responding to the fire with all the fire trucks, but there's not actually a fire. So exposure is kind of retraining our brain. It's retraining our body's alarm system. That alarm system is really hard to ignore. That's why it feels so uncomfortable, because our body's alarm system is meant to keep us safe and essentially keep us alive. And we have to retrain our brain to know when we need that alarm to go off and when we don't need that alarm to go off. So exposure therapy helps to kind of recalibrate our system a little bit so it's working better for us and not making things more complicated than we need it to be. There's also a lot of medications, particularly SSRI medications, serotonin medications that can be helpful for OCD, and the combination of medication plus exposure and response prevention therapy can be very beneficial. So I'll talk a little bit about the difference between tics and OCD, because there's a lot of overlap here. So we know around 2 to 3%, sometimes up to 4 or 5% of the general population has OCD, but around 30 to 60% of people with Tourette syndrome have OCD, right? So, and early onset OCD, having OCD at a younger age, typically it can onset for people between the ages of 8 and 12, though this really can be different for different people. It can also start for people later in life. But the earlier it starts, that tends to be more we believe it to be more genetically related to having tics. And we also know that people who have tics and OCD may also have ADHD, anxiety. These things kind of genetically run together. And there can be some overlap, both in the symptoms that one experiences, but also in the treatment and how we learn to deal with them. Okay, so both OCD and tics create this cycle that we call negative reinforcement. And what that means, OCD and tics are negatively reinforced. And what that means, when something is reinforced, it means it happens again. If it's positively reinforced, right, that would mean that thing happens again because something good happened as a result. If it's negatively reinforced, that thing happens again because it takes away something negative. And we understand OCD and tics to be negatively reinforced because when we do a compulsion or even when we experience a tic, it takes away something negative or uncomfortable. But then it creates this cycle that the tics and the compulsions repeat themselves because it takes away something that is very uncomfortable or aversive. Okay, so compulsions, as I mentioned, relieve anxiety or stress or distress caused by the obsession, at least in the short term, not forever. Then the obsession comes back and we feel we have to do the compulsion again. And a tic, when we experience a tic, many people experience that as a feeling of relief from that uncomfortable sensation of the urge that happens right before a tic. So sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference between a tic or a compulsion. And the first question that I might ask is, what happens right before? Why do you think this is happening? And a compulsion is often to get rid of an anxiety or it's tied to a specific thought. If I don't do this thing, this other bad thing might happen. Whereas with a tic, it's more about a feeling for most people or a sensation like a premonitory urge. But sometimes it can be hard to know the difference. Sometimes with OCD, we may not have a specific thought. It can be just more of a feeling like I have to do this thing. So there are some behaviors that kind of fall in the middle. And often that falls into this category of what we call Tourettic OCD. And so obsessions that have to do with feeling like things need to be just right, symmetrical or precise. Compulsions like ordering, counting, repeating things tend to fall in this middle category. And it's more common in people who have both Tourette syndrome and OCD. And we can use both exposure and response prevention or CBIT for some of the behaviors or compulsions that fall into this category, or for tics that fall into this middle category. For those of you who aren't familiar, CBIT stands for our Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention for Tics. Okay, so we have a variety of different behavioral interventions that we can choose from depending on whether we think these are tics or compulsions or maybe something in between. Some examples might be like a repeating, switching a light on and off until the switch makes just the right sound or feels just the right way, sharpening pencils until the point is perfect, or this not just right feeling. So putting books in a certain order because you're afraid of something bad happening, or because it just has to be this way, or I feel really bad, or like something might explode. So it is important to know how to advocate for yourself, but also to know when you don't have to disclose about OCD or tics, right? So you're here, you're learning about OCD. That's an awesome first step. It's really good to know where to get good sources of information. And the Tourette Association of America has so much excellent information on the website and in their resources so that you can really understand. The more we understand ourselves, the better, the more empowered we feel. We know how to help ourselves. We can learn strategies, and often the less scary it becomes. When we don't really understand what's going on with us, it's a lot harder to know how to deal with whatever's going on for us. So you can feel more comfortable and confident talking about what it is you're experiencing, whether it's OCD or tics. Sometimes OCD might be invisible to other people and they don't understand the distress that you're experiencing inside. And so you may at times need to explain or want to explain why some things are hard for you. So it can be helpful to make a plan, right? Decide what you feel comfortable sharing and why, and practice. It can often be helpful to practice how you might answer questions or describe your experiences to other people. So practice with someone you trust. And you can also decide, with whom. You don't have to share everything with everyone. Attending 504 meetings or IEP meetings, if you have them, knowing your rights in school and at work is also really important. So just a few examples. So for teachers, you might say, it's hard for me to take notes. Can I get a copy from the smartboard? Or I have a hard time filling in bubble sheets. Can I write in my answers instead? To a friend, you might say something like, a doctor tested me and said I need extra time because stuff takes me longer. So in sum, it's really important and helpful to know what OCD is, to know what the most effective treatments are and how they work, so that you know what you're looking for and whether you're getting the best treatments that are available to you. And these can help you feel like you can take some control back so that OCD doesn't boss you around. It sometimes helps to know the difference between OCD, Tourette, and Tourettic OCD. There might be different treatments that could be beneficial. So careful assessment is always important. And it's helpful to advocate for yourself, to practice and feel confident in talking about what your experiences are to help you get ready to take on challenges in life, develop independence, and feel confident in doing so. So with that, I will turn it over to Izzy, and then at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Bennett, for sharing a little bit of information. Oh, something just happened. Oh, okay. Can everyone hear me okay? We're good? Because my computer just froze up a little bit. Hey guys, so a little bit more about myself that wasn't already shared. I became a Tourette ambassador in 2019 after my brother was diagnosed with Tourette, and I had always struggled with Tourette, OCD, and anxiety, but I never actually really comprehended what it was. So just a little bit of a backstory before I really get into like the bulk of what I'm saying. I was diagnosed with TS when I was 5, and I used to have things happen to me all the time when teachers would be like, I had this one tic where I would like roll my eyes or something like that, and I would have teachers who would think I was being rude or something like that, and I would just always, in general, always knew I was different in a sense. And once I got to middle school is when I really started taking on performing, because in my mind I was like, if I perform, I can try and be someone else, because at the time I was very insecure for like about my diagnosis and stuff. So I started performing, and I realized that when I was performing, my tics and honestly all compulsions just went away. So I started using that as a self-expression. So I would sit there and I would pretend to be someone else, but it started morphing into this love for public speaking and this love for acting and all these great things. So seemingly as I got to high school, my tics started to fade away, but I did start getting lots of OCD, as Dr. Bennett was talking about. So I did experience things like she was saying about washing your hands, or if I don't like knock on wood for something, the thing that I was worried about is going to actually happen. So things like that in general did affect me. So the title of this presentation is Losing OCD as Your Superpower. And I know some people are probably thinking like, how can anything come out of this that's good? But I realized, so when I was performing, I do acting. and I was on a Disney show when I was a freshman, and a lot of big part of acting is memorizing your lines. So for a lot of people, it's very difficult to memorize lines, especially pages and pages so fast. Like I would get the script a day in advance before I had to shoot. So I had to memorize like 8 pages of lines before I could actually go into work the next day. So for most people, that'd be overwhelming. But as someone with OCD, I already am so used to reading things a bunch of times because one of my compulsions used to be I had to sit there, and if I read something, my brain would tell me you have to go read it again. So I would sit there and seemingly I'd memorize 8 pages of lines in 20 minutes because I would reread it so many times and my brain would just latch onto that information. So overall, I just ended up excelling at that. And that is part of the reason I use OCD as my superpower. Another way I use it is, it was mentioned by Haley that I play football. I started playing football my sophomore year of high school. And in football, it's the same thing. You have to memorize a lot of plays and all the routes and stuff. And you have to be very good at adjusting on the fly. So I would sit there with my playbook open and I would just redraw all the plays. So if it was like I run receiver. So if I had a certain route, I would draw the route and I would draw the rest of the play out on a piece of paper and I would quiz myself on it. And part of the OCD was I had to draw it a certain amount of times so it looked perfect. So that just helped me in general with that. And even when I give these talks, OCD helps because in my mind, I have to, before I give these, I have to repeat everything I want to say over and over again and look at my notes and this and that. So it's all very, definitely, like it can be taken as a very stressful subject for some people. But if you choose to look at it in a light where it's like, if you choose to take it in a good way and try to be optimistic about it, then it can definitely improve parts of your life. Like, who knows, maybe some of you guys want to be actors after this, or want to be actresses, or want to take on public speaking, because you truly can do anything. Even with this diagnosis, you can truly do anything. And even I started even taking medication like Dr. Ben was talking about for OCD. And that is a really good like solution. And also the great thing about exposure therapy is I have been through exposure therapy myself, and you can practice it without even going to therapy. I used to have this one tic when I used to wear glasses, and I have to take the glasses off my face and then like tap them on my head a couple times before I put them back on. So I went into exposure therapy my first time, and I told her that was like really bothering me. So we sat there, I took my glasses off and we sat there for like 30 minutes, and I just couldn't put my glasses back on. I just sat there with them out, like off my face. And when I got home, I realized that the urge to do the tapping thing on my forehead was just gone. So I realized that I can do that without even going to the actual therapy office. I've done it with so many other things. I used to have to check to make sure the water wasn't dripping under all my faucets. And one day I was just like, I'm not going to do it anymore. So I just literally sat there and forced myself not to do it. And it's definitely very straining and very uncomfortable thing to do. But in the end, it will work. You just have to have trust in the process and stuff like that. Another thing that Dr. Bennett was saying that I do experience is testing accommodations. You should never be afraid to stand up for your rights. And if you need to take extra time to take tests, it definitely is worth it. I just took the ACT and I needed extra time because it does take me a while to fill out the bubbles on the Scantron. So I got proof of accommodations, and sometimes like some of my friends ask me why I have it. And instead of being like closed off and kind of embarrassed that I have OCD, I choose to tell everyone and advocate for the fact that I do, because then they're very understanding. I'll tell them, they'll be like, oh, that makes sense. They're not like bullies about it. They're not mean about it. They just understand. And testing accommodations, if you need it, are very helpful. I also have a typing accommodation at school, where if I have to handwrite an essay, I'll end up just being able to type it instead, because it's just what works for me in my life. So, and like, yeah, it definitely, like some of my friends, when they see that, they think it's like, why do you get to do that when I have to handwrite it? And I just explain to them that I need it more than other people. So it's definitely something that can be taken as a chore, and that you like have to do these compulsions and stuff. But the mix with exposure therapy, medicine, and doing what I do, and just taking into account that you can use it to your advantage in life, is just really what helps me get through my day-to-day life. And even when I was in the show Sydney to the Max, I even got to play my character had testing accommodations in one of the episodes. So I got to actually play a character with testing accommodations, which was just super cool. And I felt super rewarding. And I just felt so great that I get to come on here and talk with you guys about all this stuff that just goes on in my life, because in the end, no one else is going to be able to talk about it as well as like someone who has it. So if any of you guys experience any of this stuff, you could so easily do what I'm doing right now, but talk to your friends about it or talk to other people who have it, because you never know what's going on with people. Like I've met people, I used to have a friend and I would talk to him about OCD all the time. And one day he came up to me and he was like, Izzy, I think I have OCD as well. And he would tell me some of the compulsions he did. And I would tell him that do the exposure therapy and stuff, but he didn't go to the therapist. I just told him what to do like at home. And we stopped being friends like a year ago, but a couple months ago, we ran into each other and he came up to me actually. And he was like, Izzy, I just wanted to I know we don't really talk as much anymore, but I just want to tell you that the stuff with OCD you told me about really worked and it changed my life. He just told me that he doesn't experience any of the OCD things he used to experience. He doesn't experience any of the compulsions anymore because he did the exposure therapy on his own. So it's definitely something you have to put your mind to and focus on. But in the end, exposure therapy is a super great tool, and it works with anyone. It works with everything. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my story. I know we're like a little under time, but that's my story. I mean, if any of you guys have any questions about anything, you can definitely ask me right now in the chat. But yeah, that's about it.
Thanks for sharing that, Izzy. That was really awesome. And I think really brought to life a lot of the PowerPoint stuff that I was talking about. I particularly loved what you said about trusting the process. Because as a therapist, when I explain exposure therapy to someone who's really living with this experience and the distress and anxiety, it's hard for them to trust me, really. Like they have to trust that I have gone through these experiences with people before, but to hear it from you, someone who's lived it, I think is so meaningful, and may make it easier for people to take that leap and put themselves on the line to try something that can be really hard.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely all about the process, and it's all about just trusting it and knowing it's going to be hard and accepting the fact that it's going to be hard, but pushing through it and persevering and using it to your advantage, like I was saying.
The other thing that I think I tell young people sometimes is that learning these skills when you're young essentially can help you for the rest of your life. We have to live with stress and anxiety. It's a part of life. We can't avoid it. Unfortunately, I wish we could. So going through something hard sucks when you're young, but it also can empower you, as you described, with skills and strategies that can help you in other areas of your life as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we have some time for some questions. If any of you guys have any, you could type it in the Q&A section and we have some time. We'll just answer them.
Thank you so much, Izzy. Actually, we do have one question for Dr. Bennett. Do you ever get stuck with OCD in an important moment, like when you're taking a test or if you're filming? Oh, that one's for Izzy. I'm so sorry, not for Dr. Bennett. Let me ask that question again for you. Do you ever get stuck with OCD in an important moment, like when you are filming or taking a test? And if so, what do you do?
That is actually a really good question. So like I said, I definitely have experienced that before, specifically when filming, because OCD does come out in high stress situations. So when I'm filming and the camera's on, I have experienced compulsions before. And in the moment, I just think to myself, this is like exposure therapy. It's the same thing. You're doing it in action. It's not like you're in a comfortable place sitting at home. Because I remember when I went through exposure therapy, my therapist told me to sit down and do it at night when you're about to go to sleep, because that's when your body is the most relaxed and you're like in a great mental place. But as you get better and better at it, you realize you can do it in your day-to-day life whenever it comes up. Like you don't have to force it. Like I said with the glasses example, like I forced to take my glasses off, but once you get better at it, you do it in the moment. So when I was filming in the moment and I got these compulsions, I would just tell myself it's exactly like exposure therapy, and I have to sit there and just power through and do what I have to do. and it will go away naturally. So that's my advice for that.
Yeah, often when we are doing exposure therapy, many therapists will suggest doing it gradually and kind of working your way up from easier to harder. And this can be true for behavior therapy for tics as well. But ultimately, you want to work towards using these strategies in the most important and maybe most challenging settings and situations. So that may be, we can't always work our way up. Sometimes the challenges just come and we have to deal with them. But if you have that opportunity to work your way up, then using these skills in the most challenging settings where you might need them is really important.
Awesome. Well, we got some more questions. Oh, we have a comment from Mark Giovin. Oh goodness, I hope I don't butcher this. Mark Giovinazzi. He said, "Great perspective, Izzy. Thank you." Awesome.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
We have another question from John L. Bean. Hi, John L. Is there a difference between obsessions and hypervigilance? It's hard to know if my obsessions / mental images about safety and danger could be OCD or if it's from trauma.
That's a great question. And something that I would recommend talking about really carefully with a therapist so that they can really understand all of your experiences and help make that what we call differential diagnosis. When there may be more than one thing contributing to your experiences, we want to try as best we can to know where things are coming from. But it can be really hard to, again, as we talked about with OCD and Tourette, and trauma can make that really complicated. When we experience something traumatic, it changes the way we think, it changes the way our body responds. But some people may also have, if you have sort of a pre-existing OCD or a vulnerability towards OCD, it may, there may even be a little bit of both, where there may be an obsessive type of response. The thoughts still may fall into that category, but may be sort of colored by the past experiences that you've had. So it's complicated, and I can't specifically know the accurate answer for you without having spent much more time getting to know you. I think it's an important question to ask a therapist if you have one. And I can also share some ways to find well-trained therapists for OCD and Tourette and trauma. But just to know that stressful life experiences or traumatic life experiences can color anything that we're already experiencing, whether that's tics, whether that's OCD, or other types of anxiety.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. Another question from John Glisson. What do you recommend if someone has breathing tics or difficulty doing deep breathing and mindfulness exercises?
Izzy, is this something you have any tips on, or do you want me to take this one?
I've never experienced any deep breathing tics before, so I don't think I can personally talk about that from experience.
I think that's a tough one too, John, because I love deep breathing, and it's one of the first things that I often practice with people. I know it is also really hard for a lot of people, and it can take a lot of practice, but particularly if you have breathing tics, it can be really complicated. So again, working with a therapist as best you can, when we come up with a competing response for tics, it's a collaborative process between me and the person that I'm working with. So I might have suggestions, but it's really important that the person I'm working with tries it out while we're in session together, and then tells me this works, this doesn't work. This might work for me in some situations, but it's not going to work for me in these other situations. So it's a little bit of a trial and error process. And then you may go and try it out for a week and see when it worked, when it didn't work, how well it worked. But a couple things with breathing tics that we try to work on when we're coming up with a competing response. Deep breathing is a go-to competing response for any vocal tic, including a breathing tic, but we would want to try to, as best we can, if this makes sense, the competing response would be the opposite of the airflow that produces the tic, if that makes sense. So if the tic is breathing out through your nose, then the competing response might be slowly breathing in through your nose. And if it's breathing in through your mouth, then the competing response would be the opposite, like slowly breathing out. So I don't know if that in particular is something that may be helpful to try out a little bit. It does often take a lot of practice. As I've mentioned, these behavioral treatments are challenging and take practice. The other thing that I sometimes add after I've practiced breathing, this is again just something that works for some people if you want to give it a try. A couple things actually. Relaxing your jaw can help some people, just kind of relaxing your lower jaw. And this is a tricky one, but pressing your tongue to the roof of your mouth for some breathing tics, especially those in the throat, can sometimes create a little sensation that is sometimes helpful. You can't do it and talk at the same time. So that's one of those competing responses that might help sometimes, but not others. I can't talk while I'm doing that at the same time, but you can take deep breaths. So a couple things that might be helpful.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I realized my brother actually does have deep breathing tics like that, and he has done habit reversal training where he will hold in his breath instead of breathing out, and it has proven to help him a lot.
Awesome. Our next question is from Ben Brown. Izzy, are your teammates aware of or educated about your Tourette syndrome? What do they think of it and how have you handled it?
Yeah, so actually, I am supposed to be at practice right now, but I had to tell it was a great opportunity to tell all my teammates at once that I'm not going to be somebody to be doing this webinar. But yes, they are aware. And I can read the questions again, so I'm just gonna look. Teammates aware how they think about it and how to handle it. Yeah. So they actually are very nice about it, especially on the football field, because if I perform well, then they're going to be happy. And if I don't do well, they're not going to be happy. But it's never really been about OCD or Tourette with them. It's never just been about like, I'm a human being. They're all human beings. They don't see me for my diagnosis or anything like that. So that's why I would definitely urge anyone, if you are nervous about sharing your conditions with anyone or just do it with people you care about first. I promise you, no one's going to, unless they're like complete, like just jerks in life and have like, as long as they're like great, normal people, which I'm sure you guys are all surrounded with, no one's ever going to judge you for something you can't control, especially OCD and anxiety. And you can use it as a great opportunity to educate others if they don't already understand. So that's what I'm doing. And you guys can all do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Izzy. All right, let's see. We still got some time. Okay, good. This one is from Heather Lieberman. This is Izzy's mom for Dr. Bennett. Do you know how much about the device that is being developed to actually help reduce tics? What is it and how does it work?
I'm not sure what device you're referring to. If you can be a little more specific, there's so many amazing innovations that are being developed all the time by researchers to decrease tics as well as OCD and other anxiety related conditions.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm not sure what device you might be talking about. If you can elaborate a little bit more on that, Heather. But we do have another question from Janelle. Question for Izzy. You mentioned that you're using your OCD as a superpower, such as helping you prepare for presentations. Do you notice any other advantages you have because of your Tourette syndrome or your OCD?
Yeah, definitely. So like I was saying earlier, it helps me a lot when preparing for filming because I get to look over the script multiple times. And one of my like compulsions used to be I had to read certain sentences over and over again. So it would definitely help when I was filming for something or preparing for a role, because I still can memorize things very easily because of my OCD. It's something that I've learned, and people definitely can like see that. It also helps with studying a lot when I'm studying for a test. One of my compulsions will be to write a certain word down multiple times or just sit there and I'll read like the study guide over and over again. So what ends up happening is I end up memorizing a lot of information because like it just ends up, my brain just works that way. And also even with driving too, if I like have an OCD compulsion to be super safe while driving and like not be distracted at all, I'm very locked in while I'm driving normally because of my OCD and stuff like that. I just tend to tune everything else out and focus on it. And even with football too, when I'm learning the plays, I draw them up. I said that in the webinar, I'll draw up the plays and just memorize them that way. So I'm a very visual learner, and OCD definitely helps with that because I will communicate everything and learn through drawing, reading, writing. And that definitely is all heightened because of my OCD.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Izzy and Dr. Bennett. I think those are the last of our questions right now. Oh, wait, no, I think we just got another one. Okay, from John Wilson. Sorry about that. How do you make adults believe you when you say that you are ticking. I have targeting tics that focus on people, and I think I'm just purposefully saying what I'm saying, and that Tourette is just an excuse. I think what they're asking is how to make adults believe you when you say that you're ticking.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Dr. Bennett talk about like what to do, but from experience, what I've done when people don't believe me is I'll just say, okay, you don't have to believe me, but it's true. Or sometimes I've even seen people carry like a diagnosis card around with them or something to, if, I mean, it's a really hard thing to answer just because in my life, I don't really necessarily need to prove anything to anyone. And that's how I go about my life is if someone doesn't believe me, then I don't really, I kind of ignore them and just think, okay, they think whatever they want because I know that it's true. But if you're in a situation where like it's beneficial for you, then maybe you can talk to a teacher or someone who knows and someone who's super educated on it, or you can even direct them to me. I'll leave my phone number in here and you can even direct them to me. So if they need to talk to someone about it, I'm always here.
Yeah, I agree. And John, I'm sorry that you've had this experience. I see you've said you've had a proof of diagnosis for people and they still don't trust you. So I think that's why webinars like these and programs like the Youth Ambassador Program are so valuable, so that people can be educated about what Tourette is and what it is not, and to raise awareness and decrease stigma. Sometimes having that card that explains this is, I have this is why certain things are outside of my control. But we can't always control the way people will respond to us, no matter what it is that we're experiencing with other people. So I think, as he said, we can focus on our own reactions and share the information that you have earnestly, and look for those people who will be on your side and on your team and support you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Bennett. Do we have any more questions? If so, you can put them in the Q&A box. We will be following up with an email if you have any questions that didn't get answered today. This is a great time to fill out the survey using the link in the chat that Wendy put in for you. Your feedback is very important to us so we can continue providing quality programming here at the TIA. So
I also left my phone number in the chat. If any of you guys have questions, you can text me. That's how I respond. Like, I know email is what everyone is saying, but I'm much better at responding to texts because that's how I do it. But if you guys ever need anything or just advice on anything or have questions for me personally, you can text me and I'll be there.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much again. And thank you to everybody who attended this webinar this evening. And to our wonderful presenters, Dr. Bennett, Izzy, you were both very insightful and inspiring. It was a pleasure listening to you both. Please, if you haven't used the link in the chat to fill out our quick survey, please do so. We very much appreciate your feedback. And you can always reach out to us at support@tourette.org or call us at 888-4TOURET.
Thank you guys so much for coming again.
Thank you all so much.